You know, every week lately, it feels like there's been something new for the Star Citizen community to be outraged over. And citizens, this week is no different. This time it's outrage over respawning in Star Citizen. Moving forward, you'll now be able to more conveniently die and respawn at a Tier 3 medical bed, starting in 3.23.1, the kind of beds you can find on the ambulance-style, currently flyable ambulance-style ships like the C-8R Pisces or the Cutlass Red. A feature previously reserved for Tier 1 beds only, which are an exclusive feature of the more expensive, higher tier ships still in concept, like the Apollo Medevac or the Endeavour Hospital. This is apparently the worst thing to happen to the game since last week when we were all outraged over something else. Master modes, of course, how could I forget? In fact, a quick look over Spectrum, and I think we're outraged over two things at once right now. So this is another controversial decision by CIG that has the community divided, because this could impact the importance of emergency medical rescue gameplay, because players can just choose to respawn instead of waiting 20 minutes for rescue while doing nothing but staring at their lifeless body and not actually playing the game. It could help trivialize the down state, aka getting incapacitated, and reduce consequences for death during FPS combat in Star Citizen, as it could become easier to simply respawn and get straight back into the fight. I think people are being very short-sighted here, and throughout this video I'm going to explain why. Now, some think this is just a temporary change to alleviate the inconvenience of death throughout the 3.23 patch cycle, but what if it isn't, and what if this change is here to stay? First of all, I don't agree that this change is temporary. Patch 3.23, in my opinion, has made the game better than ever, and it's also increased TTK. There's no reason that we'd be dying more often in patch 3.23 than we would in any other patch prior. Secondly, CIG dev Zach Priest was talking quite candidly on Salty Mike's Star Citizen Discord server, and his messages seemed to imply that this was actually a systemic change and something that had come from the top down that was supposed to be actioned quite a long time ago. So, it's not temporary, and according to Zach, death of a spaceman will ensure dying continues to have meaningful consequences. For those who might be relatively new, and by relatively new, you found the game in the last few years, because this is such an old concept. But death of a spaceman is the idea of permadeath in Star Citizen, a major concept of the game outlined by Chris Roberts early on in 2013. Just for reference, people were still playing Flappy Birds in 2013, and the Harlem Shake was a cultural meme. Death of a Spaceman was last touched upon again during a Calling All Devs episode in 2020 between Richard Tyra and Mr. Roberts himself.
What is it?
The idea with Death of the Spaceman is to try to get some kind of meaningful consequence to dying in a game.
Okay, like if my body is unrecoverable or my friends can't get to me, then I'm gonna kind of die and have to be recloned into this body. That my DNA is gonna have to be re-imprinted into this shell. And during that process, that's the process where your DNA can kind of fracture or kind of lose some of its integrity. And that is kind of what Chris touched on in terms of like you're losing a life in terms of gameplay terms.
In short, if CIG commits to this idea, dying in certain ways will eventually lead to permanent changes to your character and your physicality after you are cloned and brought back to life. Die in an explosion and respawn with an artificial limb, get your head blown off and respawn with different coloured eyes. Die too many times and your character will die altogether, passing down some elements of your riches, possessions and reputation to a new character that you've already assigned. Death of a Spaceman is often referenced like some old holy Bible guideline for the game, but it feels like we're so far off ever having anything that resembles it, I'd be surprised if it ever makes it into the game at all. So aside from Death of a Spaceman eventually, potentially being a deterrent for dying, how else can we ensure players are not simply choosing to die and respawn repeatedly in the short term using a relatively cheap and readily available Tier 3 bed such as the Pisces Rescue or the Cutlass Red? Well, there's many ways this can work, which should, in my opinion, keep everyone happy, while providing more choice, depth, And yes, a little bit of extra convenience in our favorite space game that's already filled to the brim with lots of inconvenience already. First of all, respawning from any bed needs to have a cost associated with it. So my first suggestion is to simply make respawning require an expensive resource and commodity. We'll call this resource green goo for now. Similar to the green goo we use in the guns for healing already, this could be a much more rare and expensive version purchasable at medical stations with a limited stock, possibly even tied to the medical supplies commodity in the future dynamic economy whenever this guy shows up again. Give medical ships a specific storage space or section in their inventory for the green goo and limit its capacity based on the ship and its medical capabilities. So in the case of the Pisces, a small one-man ship with barely enough room to swing a cat, this ship would have a very low capacity for holding green goo. Let's say a single respawn before it needs to be restocked. This would essentially give a solo explorer or bunker buster a second chance. A single respawn if they chose to use it. This does, however, create another problem that could be abused. What would be stopping you storing an entire ship full of green goo and simply restocking your respawn bed after every death for limitless respawns? A Hercules Starlifter, for example, which can house multiple rescue Pisces and has a storage space for tons of green goo, could act as a mobile hospital, which detracts from medical-based ships and would present a tricky problem to balance. My suggestion here is to make green goo volatile, in that it needs to be kept within a ship that is equipped to keep the green goo in an optimal state, so that it remains usable for respawns, just like anything biological in a lab that needs to be kept in a fridge or whatever, wherever they keep that kind of stuff. These could be medical racks or devices found on the walls, just like you find weapons racks in the back of a Cutlass Black. This is where you would store green goo to be inserted into medical beds for use when they need to be replenished. Give the green goo a time limit before it spoils, so you can't hold it indefinitely unless it's specifically held in a green goo medical rack. This would also provide a job for medical crew aboard medical ships to move around and keep medical beds stocked up. This would solve the problem of large ships without medical capabilities holding large quantities of green goo and simply resupplying medical ships with it. This is another way you could create a difference between all the different tiers of medical ships, with some having zero capacity for extra green goo storage, like the Pisces, to ships like the Apollo and Endeavour having much more room and sustainability as a mobile respawn or hospital. But wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more!
Let's say before you died you attained a tier 1 or tier 2 injury, which actually starts to become pretty restrictive in your ability to play the game. Well, you should respawn with the same injuries, unless your bed is capable of healing them and your ship has enough juice to do so. So if you respawn on a lowly tier 3 bed, you'd retain any injuries beyond a tier 3 injury in severity, so you'll still need a tier 2 or tier 1 bed to be back to your old self again. Additionally, CIG could introduce something like a respawn sickness, which is lengthier depending on the quality of the bed that you respawned at. This could temporarily create dizziness or stamina drain, affecting your speed or aim with a weapon, reducing your ability to get straight back into the action, and abuse it for combat situations. We can't rule out respawn delays either, so each time a bed is used to respawn, a timer begins before it can be used to respawn again. And once again, this could be shorter on higher tier dedicated medical ships. Let's not forget, any hospital or respawn bed will also have range limitations, and for it to be really abusable on foot, you'd need that respawn pretty close to the action. In any player-on-player situation, locating the other party's respawn location becomes an additional strategy, and with radar and range limitations, it shouldn't be too difficult to locate a ballsy respawn point and deal with it, causing the user to lose a ship and any items or expensive green goo stored inside. Outside of that, the many limitations I proposed should make respawning a choice of risk versus reward and an engaging loop for medical ship owners and professions too. This also encompasses medical stations, medical supply commodity trading, and an added consideration for logistical gameplay or green goo supply runs for medical ships. So where do emergency medical responders fit into all this? Well, that's easy. Death of a spaceman. Assuming this is the route we're still going, no one is going to want to respawn unless they really have to. It doesn't solve the problem of the riveting gameplay loop of having to stare at your lifeless body for X amount of time, completely at the mercy of any player who does or doesn't accept accept your medical beacon, and when they finally do, they're 50 million kilometers away, but let's leave that outrage for another week. Add all my considerations on top, and whether you can respawn at a tier 3 or tier 1 bed, there's still plenty of room for balance, meaning, and consequence when it comes to death in Star Citizen. I just hope CIG can make the right choices when it comes to this moving forward. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, thank you to everyone who helps support me so I can continue doing what I love, making content for you guys. Your support is very much appreciated, and if you'd like to provide some extracurricular support while receiving some sweet perks at the same time, consider becoming a meaty member over at my fourth wall, just like these awesome meaty members on screen right now. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for the support, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.